And I will introduce our next speakers, and this is all focused on prosecuting elder abuse issues. We're going to be joined by AUSA Andrew McCormick, DDA Mark Rucci, and AAG Suzanne Russell in just a moment. And again, like we mentioned on Tuesday, if you do need legal education credits for any of this, please email Jill Randall. She will put her email in the chat box. If you have any questions during the presentation, please put those into the chat box as well. And we'll get rolling here. So I will turn it over to the prosecutors.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Okay, so we just wanted to, the point of the presentation really is to give some perspective in terms of what kind of cases are being prosecuted by various prosecutorial entities. I'm an assistant U.S. attorney, but I'm also often called an assistant DA. I'm often called an assistant AG because people don't really know the distinctions between those different departments. So what we've done then is we've talked about the kind of cases that we deal with, and how we get referrals, what our offices are set up like. And then for Mark and Suzanne, they also go through and talk about in some detail about a case study of a case that they've actually worked on. So with that in mind, I think that I expect there'll probably be a fair amount of questions at the end. So we'll try to get through somewhat efficiently and hopefully have some time to take some questions at the end. So Mark, if you want to get started, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. My name is Mark Rucci. I am the Deputy District Attorney for Penobscot and Piscataquis counties. In our office, just to give a little bit of the structure, in our office, there are 12 attorneys, including myself and the district attorney, Chris Almy. I am the second in command. I'm appointed by him. And we supervise, the other 10 attorneys in the office. In terms of division of workload, it's like drinking from a fire hose. Basically, we take every type of case from every department except for certain financial crimes, and, homicides, like actual intentional or knowing murder. But for the most part, if a crime occurs, then it is going to be investigated by a local police department, and it's going to be sent to our district attorney's office. That would include, in many cases, crimes involving elder abuse. So, Andrew, if you want to go to the next slide, this is just basically saying the area that I cover, and then we've moved on to, so there we go, Penobscot and Piscataquis. I don't do much in Piscataquis. That's kind of our boss's fiefdom. It's small caseload. Not many people live out there. So there's the district attorney covers that as part of his normal assignment, I suppose, takes it for himself. So as many of you probably know, under Maine law, and I'm talking about Title 22, Section 3485, the department, when they get reports of abuse, neglect, or exploitation of an incapacitated or dependent adult, they shall immediately report the suspected abuse, neglect, or exploitation to the appropriate district attorney's office. So the way that works is that when the department gets a report from somebody, they essentially, and this is, I'm only on the receiving end of it, so I don't know exactly how that all gets compiled, but it gets put in a spreadsheet and it comes to my office. And when it comes to my office, the way that it's set up, at least in Penobscot County, and I can only speak for Penobscot and Piscataquis, I can't speak for, how the other counties do it, but I have a strong suspicion that it's similar. They compile recent reports, and then they send them over to our office in a spreadsheet format. And it basically contains, the affected party. If there is a suspect, sometimes it's like a licensing issue and there won't be a suspect, but if there's a suspect, it'll include the suspect. name, and then as much detail as the reporting person provided about what was alleged to have happened there. And my job at that point is to read these referrals and determine what, if anything, gets forwarded on to law enforcement. As you can see from my slide, referrals fall into one of three categories typically, which is like physical abuse or neglect is one that comes up a lot. Financial exploitation is one that comes up a lot. And then other what I would call non-criminal. Now, the line between what's criminal and what's non-criminal is often blurry. But for instance, like licensing issues, like, hey, you know, this facility in, you know, just to pick a town that's not even in the county, in Wittapitlock, Maine, is doing this thing. We do have authority under Maine law to bring charges against organizations, but oftentimes when I read that, I'm thinking that's more appropriate for, you know, relevant licensing authorities to be made aware of, or it's more appropriate, or maybe we don't, you know, this local police department, you know, that's not the type of thing that they would normally deal with or have the expertise to deal with. Sometimes I do, you know, reach out to the Attorney General's office, who Suzanne is going to talk with you all. And I'll say, Suzanne, I've got this case. It's really interesting. I think it's going to take some resources, or I think it's happening across different counties. Do you guys have interest? And her and the members of her team there, Charlie Boyles, another attorney who comes to mind, are pretty good about looking at those cases, and then have at least on one or a couple occasions taken those from me and said, we'll pursue it from here. But we are the presumed clearinghouse for all of these complaints at the outset. And I take a look at them, and if I determine that this complaint looks like it might be criminal, we refer them out to either the local PD that covers that jurisdiction. Well, usually the local PD covering that jurisdiction. Some places in rural Maine do not have their own police departments. So they will have, you know, Maine State Police will be covering on certain days. And typically the way it works is if Maine State Police is providing coverage for Glenburn, then they'll get the referral. If PCSO is providing, Penobscot County Sheriff's Office is providing coverage in Corinth, they'll get the referral. That is essentially how that works. Now, the other way that these cases come in is sometimes just by reports from victims. It's not always, you know, elder abuse, and I say elder abuse. When I say that, I'm really talking about a number of issues. Oftentimes it's age-related disability, but I'm sort of lumping in cognitive issues too. Some of those are exacerbated by age. Some of those are brought on by age, or some are pre-existing and just tend to get worse or are intractable over time. The case that I guess I wanted to talk about is just an example of, admittedly, it's a pretty extreme example. Admittedly, it's a pretty extreme example of the type of case that we get, but I do think it's still illustrative of how some of these issues, how these can come to us. This was through Maine State Police, and I don't think he'd mind if I gave his name. The trooper was Taylor Bagley, who did just, and I say if he did a bad job, I wouldn't say his name. I'd let him live in anonymity, but he did great work on this case, so I think it bears noting. He had a victim who lived in the middle of nowhere who called to report that this other individual was living with him and stealing from him. And he estimated that the defendant had taken $200,000 from him over the course of time. That individual was Lloyd Burnham. The victim said that the defendant was very insistent, was basically the sum total of his complaint. Initially, after speaking with the victim, the trooper closed out the case. Bagley closed out the case as a civil matter because the only evidence of which he was aware was that, you know, someone had asked him for money and he had given it to him. Now, that's not a crime, right? It's not a crime when someone asks you for a loan to give it to him. Could it be ill-advised? Sure. But, you know, this was an older gentleman, although not somebody that I would say was elderly. I mean, he was I believe the victim was in his 60s, maybe approaching 70 years old, so not an elderly guy. And Taylor closed it out and said, I just think that he's given this money, but I'm not sure that there's a criminal angle to this. However, this person's family members really advocated for them and reached out and said, listen, my uncle's got some cognitive impairment, and Trooper Bagley took that seriously, and there was a meeting set up between legal services for the elderly, the trooper, this nephew, and the victim. Now, as it turned out, and as was more apparent upon meeting face to face, the victim here had a mild intellectual disability. He was able to live on his own. He was able to take care of some of his affairs. He didn't have in-home help or anything like that, but it was he had some diagnoses, and it was also just sort of apparent in speaking with him that there was some mild cognitive impairment there. What turned out, what Trooper Bagley learned, that the reason this guy had all this money was because when his father died, he left him a dairy farm. And while he was able to live on his own, this victim was able to live on his own, take care of his affairs, he was not competent to handle, the operation of a dairy farm. He just wasn't going to be able to do it, and the place wasn't doing so well. So the nephew assisted him in selling the farm. They got $400,000, and the nephew gave it to, put it in the bank. And that was what this poor guy was going to live on for the remainder of his life. He wasn't really able to work. And he bought a house. He bought a house, like I said, in a rural part of the state. You can, if you can advance the slide, Andy. Now, in 2017, this defendant, Mr. Burnham, just knocked on the door and said, hey, we'd love to live with you. And in exchange for living with you, we're going to provide you some services. And we'll paint. He was going to paint. He was going to fix stuff up. The house was in kind of rough shape because the victim had kind of a hard time keeping it up. So he's, and by the way, this gentleman can be very persuasive and very insistent. So to the extent you're thinking, well, that's weird. Very little doubt that he used his powers of persuasion to allow the victim to, let him come in and live with him. Shortly thereafter, large sums of money started disappearing from the defendant's bank accounts, the victim's bank accounts, and I was able to subpoena bank records and see that these large amounts were being withdrawn, anywhere between $1,000 and $12,000. As time went on, the amounts went, just continued to go up. And in 2015, just to give you an idea, the balance of the account was $162,000. Almost 163, and just about 2.5 years later, there was like pocket change in the account, and you could see the trail of just withdrawals, sometimes 2-3 withdrawals a week of large sums of money. Tellers at the bank had filed suspicious activities reports because they felt at least one teller said this guy was always in here with him, and we think he's being taken advantage of. We think this poor guy is being taken advantage of. So you can advance to the next slide, Andrew. The trooper interviewed the defendant eventually, who, after a really good interview and some time spent with him, admitted to taking over $100,000 from this victim. He said he was a drug addict and he would accompany the victim to the bank, get money, and he admitted that he spent $80,000 to $100,000 of this guy's money. Now, probably wasn't even the accurate amount. It was almost certainly more than that, but that admission was good from my perspective as a prosecutor. And he admitted that he also admitted that he knew the victim was a little slow-minded, which is important because, like I said, bad business dealings are not necessarily prosecutable. However, there are inferences under Maine law for where someone has a cognitive impairment and the defendant has reason to know of that cognitive impairment, then we can argue and the jury will be instructed to infer that they didn't have capacity, the victim didn't have capacity to enter into a truly consensual agreement. So that's the theory of the case I was going on, was this guy had a mild intellectual ability. You knew that, and you knew as such, he didn't have capacity to enter into any sort of agreement with you. So the statement that he knew this this victim was a little slow-minded was really important for us. By this time, this poor guy was so destitute that he was living in the basement of a house by a wood stove. He could no longer afford oil. He was largely not coming upstairs. Someone had helped him, or he had managed on his own to drain the pipes so that they didn't freeze, but he didn't have running water, and he was living by a wood stove. Can you advance the slide, Andrew? It was charged as a Class B theft. There is no Class A theft in Maine. So if you steal more than $10,000 or more, it's a Class B theft. I would love it if the legislature would pass some sort of law that says if you steal more than $50,000 or something, it's a Class A, but there isn't one. So it's punishable by 10 years. It was charged on the theory that, you know, he wasn't capable of consent by reason of his mild cognitive impairment. And there was evidence to suggest his limitations, short of Lloyd saying, I knew he was a little slow-minded. This guy had drawn wanted posters, hand-drawn wanted posters of the defendant and his girlfriend, and posted them on the exterior of his house. They really bore no resemblance to these people at all. And it would have been evidence that, you know, this is the kind of person that Mr. Burnham was taking advantage of. He ultimately was found guilty and sentenced to 8 years with all but 42 months suspended and 3 years of probation. I think that might be my last slide, Andrew, and I have some, you know, thoughts if it is, but could you go to the next one just so I can make sure?
It's your last one, Mark. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's an example of a really extreme example of a theft of a lot of money that generated from a report of family. Oftentimes when we do an APS referral, for better or worse, we don't always, or when we receive an APS referral and refer it out to law enforcement, for better or worse, we don't always know what happens to that. If it becomes something that's prosecutable, we get a call from an investigator saying, hey, I got an APS referral and here's what I'm dealing with. Or we end up getting a case on our desks. At that point, it gets assigned to an ADA, and the ADA decides whether or not to prosecute. I do think that something like this meeting is important, and also probably better communication with the DA's office is important, because I think a lot of people don't even understand, and I expect Suzanne to get into a little bit more into this, don't even understand, as I didn't, that a case like Lloyd Burnham's is prosecutable. If you're not looking at the presumptive inferences in the statute, you might just think, well, that stinks and this guy got taken advantage of, but where's the crime? And you have to have a little bit of expertise. I even called the AG's office and said, here's what I've got. What do you think? And Leanne Robin was able to tell me, look under the permissible inferences statute, and if you can prove this guy has a cognitive impairment, you can get there. The other thing that I think the other crime that comes up is probably most often raised by these APS referrals, but that a lot of people might not even know about. We don't see it charged very often. Is endangering the welfare of a dependent person, where if you can establish the sort of relationship that's necessary between a caregiver and a caregivee, you can charge them with, you know, sort of reckless conduct that occurs while they're under the care of this other person. I'd have to pull out the statute, and Suzanne, I think, probably works with that statute a little bit more than I do. We do have one question. Does undue influence stand in Maine? There are times when abuse can be hidden behind the mask of the elderly person being cared for. The elderly may have cognitive capacity, but afraid to complain. So undue influence, the only time I've ever actually heard that term used is actually in like probate or probate law. It's really you'll hear that a lot in probate court. It's because it's sort of a common law cause of action. So I don't hear the term undue influence, but I do think that it's sort of subsumed in some of these inferences that we can draw, that the legislature have given us, such as talking, you know, such as what I used to make the Lloyd Burnham case, which was consent without really an ability to consent. In a way, that's undue influence, and that's what Lloyd was doing. He was very forceful with this victim, and in the throughout the course of the interviews that Taylor Bagley did with this case, it was pretty clear the victim said, "I just didn't think I could say no. I didn't know how to say no." The other thing I think that Robin's question gets to is these cases can be very difficult because oftentimes the elderly person does not want to complain or feels afraid to complain. And if that's the case, it's difficult prosecutorially because sometimes that elderly person's complaint is the only real evidence that we would have of abuse, neglect, whether that be physical or mental. So it can certainly, whether that person's willing to come forward and willing to talk about it, can certainly affect our ability to make a good criminal case. Andrew, I think, I'm ready for Suzanne to take over if you want.
Yep, I'll go ahead and forward to her now.
Good afternoon. My name is Suzanne Russell, and I'm an Assistant Attorney General at the Maine Attorney General's Office. I've been a prosecutor for over 25 years and practiced law for about 35 years. Some of that private practice working what was then known as legal services for the elderly. I am the designated financial exploitation prosecutor, but my job has recently morphed into looking at other elder abuse cases that are referred to us through the Chief Medical Examiner's Office and the Major Crimes Unit, insofar as endangering the welfare of a child, manslaughter, or murder might be involved. You can, my contact information is up here. I love talking to people. You're more than welcome to call my office. My direct call's up there, my cell phone. And I am in the state system, and I notice my email is cut off, but it's suzanne.russell@maine.gov. Next slide, please. I thought it would be helpful just because a lot of, as Andrew was saying, a lot of people confuse what the three of us do, the different offices. So I thought I'd talk about the general structure of the Attorney General's office. Our office is managed by, as you know, AG Aaron Fry. He is the Chief Law Enforcement Officer in the state of Maine. There is a central office in Augusta. We have satellite offices in Caribou, Portland, and Augusta. The Attorney General's office is divided into 12 divisions. Currently, there's, last I checked a couple of weeks ago, there was 213 Assistant Attorney Generals. We used to be known as the largest law firm in Maine. I don't know if we still have that status. There's some pretty big firms that are operating right now. So as you can see, there are several divisions: the criminal, civil, child protective, child support, health and human services, litigation. Each of these divisions has a deputy AG or a chief of the division. The AG prosecutors, what is different from Mark's office and the local DA's offices where I used to work as well, is that we have statewide jurisdiction. We're not just confined to Penobscot County or whatever county the DA covers. This division, I think I left off this slide, also includes the Office of the Medical Examiner's Office. And our job, and all of us that work in the Attorney General's office, is to enforce the state of Maine laws. You can go to the next slide. So I've shown you some of the divisions that are in the Attorney General's office, and what is true is that elder exploitation abuse cases are handled across multiple divisions depending on what's happening in a case. I'm from the criminal division, so I'll be talking about the types of things that we do in our division, but the Health and Human Services also has an AAG who works with adult protective. They are responsible for some guardian and conservatorship cases. We also have the healthcare crimes unit and the securities unit, as well as a consumer fraud division, which also sometimes have their fingers in cases that involve elder exploitation. In the criminal division, there are 15 assistant attorney generals. Our chief is Lisa Marchese, who's been around for a long time. We cover homicides. We cover drug cases. There's 6 AAGs that are assigned to the drug cases. We have the Financial Crimes and Civil Rights Division, so we handle white collar financial crimes. I'm part of that, as well as the Homicide Division. And frauds, election law violations, welfare fraud, tax evasion, computer crimes. We do interstate extraditions. We do all the criminal appeals within our unit. And we advise bureaus within the Department of Public Safety, including the Maine Criminal Justice Academy, Maine State Police, State Fire Marshal's Office, organizations like that, as well as most of the AAGs that are in our divisions participate in multiple commissions, boards, advisory groups, and speak to groups such as you. Just briefly to talk about the Healthcare Crimes Unit, a lot of people mix us up with elder abuse cases. That's all right, just go back one, I think, Andrew. So these Healthcare Crimes Unit in the AG's office is the state designated Medicaid fraud control unit. They're funded federally. So they are charged with investigating and prosecuting Maine care fraud, abuse, and neglect, or financial exploitation occurring in Maine care facilities or committed by Maine care providers or their employees. So their federal limits are firm. They can only take cases that involve Medicaid fraud. We often toss cases back and forth between each other because they may get an elder exploitation or theft case that is outside of their purview and they have to send it to me and vice versa. So in the criminal division, it's one prosecutor, that's me, and one investigator. His name is David Karen. He's retired from the Waterville Police Department, had years of experience, and we are dedicated to elder financial exploitation. We also have some other side things we do in our jobs, but that's our focus. We typically receive referrals from adult protective, from district attorney's offices, like Mark was indicating, from other lawyers throughout the state, from the Maine Board of Bar Overseers. We get in-house referrals, such as I just described, and from law enforcement. Next slide, please. Some of the, if we were to take every elder financial abuse case in the state of Maine, we would probably need 20 of us to do that. So we, at the outset, I'm the first criminal prosecutor to have this purview, have this job. So at the beginning, we had to try to set out some guidelines. What can we do with our resources? What types of cases are we going to take? And these are very flexible guidelines. They're evolving. But mostly we take crimes that span multiple counties because I do have statewide jurisdiction. We take large financial and complicated crimes that necessitate intensive investigation and resources. We handle abuse or neglect deemed a homicide by the medical examiner's office, and I take conflict cases when a DA has a conflict. Some of the typical crimes that we are referred are thefts, unpaid nursing home bills, power of attorney, money diversion, abuse and neglect, and again, homicide. We also receive referrals from the FAST team, which is part of Adult Protective Services, on a regular basis. And I communicate with those caseworkers and the director frequently. And again, we receive multiple referrals from multiple agencies that work to prevent elder abuse. Just briefly, before we go to a next slide, the process in our division is when we receive a referral, I will send that to the head of our investigation division. They'll assign a detective who will either reach out to local law enforcement, take the case themselves, depending on what our resources are at that time. We have detectives in our division that have great financial skills in these investigations, but every single one of them split their time on other investigations and police shootings, which now seems to be taking up an awful lot of their time. The head of the investigations, the detective that I mentioned, Dave Karen, and I weekly review all the state adult protective DA referrals that come out. And we do kind of targeted follow-up. I'll look for the financial crimes. We'll either reach out to law enforcement to make sure they got that referral. We offer assistance or guidance, or sometimes we'll take on the case depending on what it is. Next slide, please. So what makes a case an elder financial crime? In Maine, there's not a lot of definitions. I've been out to trainings in California and some other states, and they have some great laws on the books. And we don't have all those laws, unfortunately. But in general, there are cases of financial exploitation of elderly citizens, and having just turned 60, I cringe at the thought of putting an age on that, but some states actually use 60 or 65 as a starting point. So the financial exploitation by family members, by fiduciaries, caregivers, acquaintances, strangers. The exploitation of the elderly is generally the improper or illegal use of funds or assets of an infirm or ill adult by another person for profit or other advantage. Again, there's no age requirement in Maine, and we joke that probably the people that were making the decision were all my age and they didn't want to be deemed elderly. But courts in Maine have some different mandates, and I'll go into a few of them. I put one up here. In sentencing, the judges are required to consider as a special factor the age of the victim, particularly of a victim of an advanced age. So elderly people here are a young age, rather, so it's like a child. If it's a child homicide or a child abuse, the courts have to consider the age of the victim because of their reduced ability to self-protect, or who suffer more due to their age. So when you think about elderly people who are victimized, retired people who have a fixed income, thefts from these types of people impact them more than they would be if you were in your 30s or your 40s and have a chance to recoup some of that money. Our investigations consist of a lot of paper trails. We have to prove intent of the perpetrator to steal the money, and that can be difficult in cases where the person is of a power of attorney. So when we do our investigations, we use a lot of tools. Some of those are grand jury subpoenas, where we can subpoena financial records without that perpetrator knowing. We subpoena medical records to determine if the victim has dementia or some other disability that could affect their decision-making. We interview people, we interview doctors, neighbors, bankers, all the people that are surrounding this victim. We have medical witnesses who can testify, and we follow the money. That is the primary job in our division on financial crimes, is following the money, because what we find is that it may lead to patterns of expenses and expenditures that are not normal for this elderly victim. So for instance, if the elderly victim is in a nursing home and we're seeing all kinds of Netflix and Wayfair or pick whatever online expenditures, those are not normally done by that victim. And we actually go back a few years ahead before to see what the pattern of expenses have been for the victims. We have a computer program in our office called ScanWriter to do these investigations. It takes a lot of time because there's a lot of bank records. It's not unusual. I currently have a case with 6,000 pages worth of documents. But this ScanWriter helps our detectives put those bank records in and puts them in a category so they can kind of track stuff and look. It's been an addition that came to our office 4 years ago. It was expensive, but it was well worth the money. But even when we're reviewing these cases, I think I was talking to Andrew about this, sometimes we can't find that intent to steal. Sometimes we find legitimate estate planning, and a lot of people don't understand what estate planning attorneys can do to when the individual is competent to protect their money for their family. Or sometimes, and most of the time, we see a lot of unsophisticated or ill-informed estate planning. Sometimes we find consent for the victim, and we may not agree with those decisions, but it's their consent, and that makes it not a crime. We can go to the next. So some of the barriers that we have, and I'll just talk briefly before I talk about the types of financial crimes we see, to prosecutions are consent, but bad decisions. Our elderly victims are often very embarrassed by what's happened, and so they don't report to anybody, not even family or law enforcement. They feel shame, they're sick, they may have dementia. The perpetrator is often a family member, and the victim just does not want to hurt that person or participate in the investigation because it is a family member. Sometimes we have very late reports of that, and as a result, we have a loss of evidence. But I can tell you, having done these cases for years, the strengths of these cases are that they're probably the most sympathetic victims that juries will see, other than children. They're wonderful to work with. They're believable to juries, and it's very satisfying to seek justice on their behalf. Some of the other tools we use in these cases, we can do depositions of elderly people. I just did one of a lady who had a stroke and she has some dementia. So we can preserve their testimony, but unlike in civil cases, we have to do it after the defendant has been charged so that they can confront the witness with their attorney at that time. But at least we can preserve their evidence in case they pass away or become too infirm to testify later on. We use expert witnesses. I currently have a California witness in an elder abuse case that resulted in a death, who can review medical records and give us opinions about what is elder abuse. We have victim witness advocates who are absolutely essential in dealing with elderly victims. We have talented investigators who understand that in dealing with elderly people, it's important that they earn their trust. They've learned how to interview elderly victims, and that can be very different than interviewing other people. They have to have a lot of patience, because we all know elderly people love to tell stories, and they have to be willing to build that rapport and sit and listen and get the story out over time. They have to provide a sense of safety to these people, and we have to allow them to have some control in their decision whether they want to prosecute. So it takes a special type of investigator, in my opinion, to be patient, to wait for those disclosures, to make sure they're safe, and to develop the relationship with these people. On this slide that you see in front of you, these are some of the typical crimes that I look at when I see a case. In the state of Maine, we have a section that covers theft. Years ago, theft used to be all kinds of different ways to do theft, but they consolidated that into our Title 17 statute. And so there are different definitions and I'll go over those really briefly, but these are the typical theft charges that we look at. As Mark was talking about earlier, all have a permissible inference that's helpful to us. And the legislature has put this in, and this is, part of their willingness to address elder use by putting this in. So if we can show that a defendant possessed or controlled property, let's just say money, from a person who by reason of physical illness or mental illness or mental defect, including but not limited to dementia and other cognitive impairments, and that defendant knows that person has that and is unable to make a reasonable judgment, or used undue influence, that's in the statute, that gives rise to a permissible inference under the Maine rules of evidence, which is helpful to us. Some of the definitions, the difference, theft by unauthorized taking, and I won't go into a lot of detail, but a person is guilty of theft if they obtain or exercises unauthorized control over the property of another with the intent to deprive. That's kind of simple. That's like a shoplifting. You steal, you take it away, you take the money. As Mark indicated, we only have a Class B theft. I'm right behind him where I wish we had a Class A, because the maximum we can get, no matter how much money is over $10,000, is 10 years, and the maximum fine is $20,000. Theft by deception is a charge that I've used a lot, and I'm going to show you an example of that briefly here in a minute. But that is, a person is guilty of theft if that person obtains or exercises control over property of another as a result of deception. And so if a person is creating a false impression and they know it's not true to induce someone to give up property, that can be theft by deception. Also, if a person knows to be influenced another whose property is involved and to whom the person stands in a fiduciary or confidential relationship, that can be undue influence as well. And I have another case example of that in just a moment. Excuse me. I have a cold and I apologize. So consent in these cases of the victim is not a defense if there's if the person is legally incompetent. So if there's a judicial decision that the person is legally incompetent, and a lot of social workers know that as a PP 505, they cannot make those decisions. So that's an inference. If the person has dementia or other cognitive impairments, and we often get medical records or doctors to talk about that, then again, they can't make that reasonable decision to give consent. If there's force, duress, or deception or undue influence, again, they cannot use consent. And the statutes actually have a definition of undue influence, and what that means in Maine law is misuse of real or apparent authority or the use of manipulation by a person in a trusting, confidential, or fiduciary relationship with a person who is incapacitated as an adult or as a dependent adult. So we use that definition a lot because most of our victims have some level of dementia or incapacity, or they're dependent on someone in some manner. Next slide, please, Andrew. So I'm going to give you a couple of cases that we have just recently prosecuted in our office. We resolved them, I think, after COVID in the end of 22. That kind of give you a sense of what types of cases we're handling. Next slide. So this is Tony Glidden. This is a case that I prosecuted with my co-counsel, Charlie Boyle, and I think his wife's in the audience today. But we were co-prosecutors on this case. He's currently serving a 3-year sentence in the Department of Corrections. Next slide, please. So we received this referral from the Kennebec, I received a referral from the Kennebec County DA's office after they had received a couple complaints of theft, that Tony Glidden had taken deposits for construction work from 2 victims and did not do the work. It was referred to me because one of the victims was 81 years old. Some of the other complaints, the other complaint they had, and then others they were hearing about, were from people who were not elderly at the time, but they thought that I would be interested in taking it, and I did. I want to talk to you about Beverly McGill. The first complaint that came was from Beverly McGill. She was then aged 81. She was is a former state employee with the Department of Education. She's been retired for some years. She and her husband lived in the home that he had built. After his death, she had decided, he had died just before all of this happened. And she had decided to finish some home repair projects that they'd been talking about and planning, to replace the roof and to replace some windows. She had never done a lot of that on her own. He always took care of it, but she had decided she was going to do it. She did her research. She did her due diligence. She received some recommendations and found out about mainly roofing and siding. She went online to the Better Business Bureau. She checked the comments about that. There was good reports. She didn't know at the time that most of those reports were by his family members or friends, but she had done a lot of research. So she contacted Tony Glidden, and he sent out a project manager. The project manager met her. He looked over her home. He gave her an estimate and requested a deposit in an amount that Tony had told him to request, which the project manager would later say what he thought was excessive. It was well above the 1/3 that the Maine consumer law allows. So she wrote him a check from their savings, a $25,000, and handed it to the project manager, who then immediately took it to Tony Glidden. Tony took that check to her bank, cashed it, which allowed him to have cash in hand immediately. He emailed her that day, thanking her and assured her that she would be in good hands. After that, there was delay after delay after delay, and excuse after excuse after excuse. She called, she emailed him, she was very assertive, but finally, after months, she realized that she'd been taken advantage of. Glidden, who had initially been charming, began to be aggressive with her. He was disrespectful to her. He was belittling to her in her responses. For example, he accused her of just worrying too much. She was embarrassed, but she finally confided with her daughters, which led to a report to the police. Next slide, please. So what initially appeared to be a 1 or 2 theft cases, and to some, unfortunately, law enforcement agencies, civil matters, quickly morphed into a large elder exploitation theft case. We had a detective from the Kennebec County Sheriff's Office and one of our AG detectives that spent months compiling complaint after complaint. And what they did, they went through the entire law enforcement system where people put in their police reports and started pulling out all the complaints that involved Tony Glidden. Some of them had been closed out as civil. And as they started to put all those complaints together, they started to see a trend. And the trend was that most of the victims involved elderly and retired people. Tony Glidden was being charged by multiple DAs on individual cases, and he was also racking up bail violations on those cases and drug cases. Meanwhile, we were seeking financial records through grand jury subpoenas, and we were attempting to follow the money from all of these cases. Our investigation led to a grand jury indictment for a consolidated theft by deception. I'll talk about that in a second, of over 20 victims, all of them elderly. We did exclude multiple victims that were not elderly that had sued him civilly or had projects partially done. But we charged him under a concept which we call a course of conduct. We were able to show that this was his course of conduct in targeting our elderly people. We used what we call a regional grand jury. So we used one grand jury that the court had authorized to cover multiple counties. Next slide, please. So in our job in this case was to differentiate between Tony Glidden being a bad businessman who fell upon hard times and criminal behaviors. And sometimes that's not easy with construction cases. We had to show he didn't have the ability to do the jobs. He did not intend to use the money for jobs. And he knew that at the time he was taking deposits from victims that he couldn't do the jobs. We were able to show not only that he was using the money to fund older jobs because he diverted those deposits from people, but he used it for his personal expenses. He used it for drugs. He used it for gambling. He got Bitcoin with it. Mr. Glidden was very, very good at sales. He could be charming. He was convincing. And all of these elderly victims gave him the benefit of the doubt over and over and over. And what we discovered is on the screen here that the thefts ranged just over a year. He'd only been in business a year and he caused all this damage. He was doing business as mainly roofing and siding. He advertised senior discounts on his website. He was a convincing salesman. He had lovely pictures on his website of all of his jobs. He lied to victims about delays and posted aggressive responses when they complained on his website or to the Better Business Bureau. The victims that we chose to go forward with on prosecution had no work done at all. Over and over again, he immediately cashed their checks at their bank so he would have access to cash. He diverted electronic deposits. He used the money again for online gambling, drugs, Bitcoin, and other personal expenses. In total of these 20 victims, the total amount was $115,275 in initial deposits that he stole. In fact, during this investigation, or after he'd been indicted, actually, he also borrowed money from one of our elderly gentlemen. He was 81, asked if he could borrow money so he could pay off this complaining first victim, Beverly, who was causing all these troubles for him, and to fund his anticipated bail. The gentleman agreed to do it because Tony had signed a promissory note indicating he would finish the victim's project in a couple of weeks. The victim never saw him again. So this type of manipulation is a theme we see over and over and over, and Mark's case has elements of that as well. These are some of the excuses that Tony Glidden gave to all of our victims on different dates. The weather, manpower, theft of equipment, death of an employee, theft by his employees, a lending company stole his money. He had no money to buy materials until he paid off a debt, blah, blah, blah. He had COVID. That was a good excuse during that time. He was behind on his projects. He got in over his head. He had $30,000 stolen from him. And the one that he used on Beverly that really caused her some pause in making a complaint was, if he is put in jail, his daughters won't have a father and nobody gets their siding put on. So these excuses that he was using, what we discovered, because the victims would give us their emails and their texts and through interviews, is that he was sometimes using 2 or 3 different excuses on the same day with different people. So we were able to put those into a chart to show how he was lying, because he was just lying to a whole bunch of people. Many of our victims became aware of his behavior and made reports to the police because of an aggressive reporting of an online journalist in the Kennebec area. She'd gotten wind of his behavior and she was pretty offended. So Glidden met his match with her, I believe, because she exposed his lies and repeatedly posted articles on social media about what he had done to his victims. And he made some pretty good statements and arguments with her. Next slide, please. So after Glidden was charged, we started to prepare for trial. We mean Charlie Boyle and I, and because we had then over 20 victims, it was kind of an organizational dilemma. What do we do? Because with victims, most victims don't understand the process. And so we have to spend a lot of time explaining the process, managing expectations about restitution, laying their fears about testifying. And so what we decided to do in this case was invite them all in for an informational meeting. So the 2 detectives, Charlie and I, and a victim witness advocate, invited them all in. They all came. And we met with them. And we did a PowerPoint, explained what the charges were, what we had to prove, what was going on. And we answered all their questions, general questions we could about the process, and about what testifying would be like. And after we did that, we met with them all for individual pretrial sessions before the trial. And what was interesting about bringing this group together is it kind of morphed into a Tony Glidden support group. They all met each other. They were supportive of one another, and some of them still communicate. He decided to plead guilty after we had that many people lined up to testify against him. He was convicted of defrauding over 20 customers. 14 of our victims were over the 60 years of age, and of the 14, 8 over 70 years of age. Every single one of them were retired. He was sentenced to 7 years with all but 3 years suspended, and he has 3 years of probation. He's still in prison right now. He was ordered to pay $1,000 per month toward restitution when he gets out. He's in his 30s. He's got lots of years to work, and this restitution will follow him even after probation as a standalone order. He had posted bail on various charges, and we had that forfeited to pay some of his outstanding restitution. At the sentencing, many of the victims decided not to attend because they were disgusted with him, but several did attend and they spoke. Beverly McGill gave a strong, impactful statement, and she addressed it directly to Tony Glidden. I believe it was recorded, and I think it's on YouTube somewhere, because I know his sentencing was on there, so you might want to look at it because she's a hot ticket. It was wonderful to watch how empowered she had become over the whole process. She still chats up Charlie Boyle when she sees him at the transfer station in the community, and she has lots of support through him. So I just want to say in conclusion on this case, a shout out to her and all of them. What was very scary for her turned into a very good situation. So next slide. This is the second case I want to just talk to you about. This is Anita Volpe. She was an attorney. This was a 2019 case that was prosecuted by Leanne Robin, who probably most of you know or at least heard of. She's worked in the Attorney General's office in the same position for 40 years this year. This case did not go to trial. It was resolved by a plea in the March of 2022. Next slide. So in my perspective, from several years, law enforcement has benefited from the watchful eyes of bank professionals. These tellers and managers are familiar with their customers. They observe real-time behaviors and they watch patterns of spending. Many have training in spotting elder financial abuse cases. And this, in fact, was a referral from Adult Protective Services after they had a complaint from Bar Harbor Bank and Trust. Anita Volpe, again, was an attorney. She was first licensed in 1977. She had a solo practice in Rockland. From October 2012 through April 2018, now former attorney Anita Volpe misappropriated over $1 million from 3 elderly incapacitated clients for whom she acted as both an attorney and as their agent under a power of attorney. Next slide, please. The victims, one was her mother-in-law, for whom she was a POA, a power of attorney from 2012 to 2014. Her mother-in-law was incapacitated with dementia and was in a nursing home or assisted living at that time. The second victim was a 91-year-old woman who passed away in 2019, for whom she had been a POA from 2013 to 2016. After this all came to light, Adult Protective Services became her guardian in 2017. She had made a bequest in her will to the University of Maine at Orono, which as a result of this theft was unable to be funded. She too was incapacitated with dementia and she was in a nursing home. The third was a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel. She was 85 at the time of the power of attorney, which went into effect in 2014. She was in a memory union and was incapacitated. She had never married or had children. The beneficiary, the sole beneficiary of her estate was the Bowles School of Jacksonville, Florida, who had provided her with a scholarship to finish college after her father had died. And so, excuse me, her will left all of her money to the school to thank them for that. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So the Board of Bar Overseers had become involved when a report was made to them about her mother-in-law's thefts. The mother-in-law thefts, which we later found out totaled 132,000 plus. Ms. Volpe had settled a civil lawsuit and voluntarily gave up her law license in 2016. But what the Board of Bar Overseers didn't know at the time was that she had stolen thousands of dollars from 2 other victims. And so then entered the complaint from the Bangor Bank and Trust to Adult Protective Services regarding the 2 other victims. Even after she had given up her law license, she stole money from one victim's account, and that would be the Lieutenant Colonel's account. After a very long paper investigation, if you can just go back just for a minute, Andrew. The AG investigator discovered extensive diversion of money from all the victims' accounts. As you can see the numbers up here, it was huge. 91-year-old POA client, over 500,000. The Army Lieutenant Colonel, over 500,000. The nursing homes where the victims had been living had not been paid. Okay, next slide. We found that the financial investigation showed that she had pilfered many smaller amounts of money over time, that she had engaged in a pattern of using client funds to pay her personal credit cards, her mortgage, repairs on her law office, fund her IOLTA and business accounts, which is for her law office, pay real estate taxes in Florida. She bought a piece of real estate in Florida and other miscellaneous expenses. She used $106+ from 2 victims to finance a legal settlement of her mother-in-law's lawsuit when she voluntarily surrendered her license in 2016. And after that extensive follow the money investigation, she was indicted by the grand jury for multiple counts of theft. Next. So she was charged and pled guilty to 3 counts of theft by unauthorized taking, Class B, which all had the maximum sentence of 10 years. At sentencing, we had requested a sentence of 10 years, all but 5 years suspended and 3 years of probation. But the sentence imposed was 10 years, all but 18 months and 3 years of probation. The judge cited her age, her health. She'd had cancer on and off, and her community support. It's my understanding that multiple people from the community supported her during the sentencing. All of the victims had died at that time. She appeared at the sentencing with $65,000 available to pay toward her restitution. She said that she did not know why she had stolen the money, except that it likely had to do with her ego-driven desire to appear successful. As a result of her actions, the UMO bequest was not funded. The Bolles School in Jacksonville received a fraction of what they would have ordinarily received for their tuition for their students on that. So these are just two types of the cases that we prosecute. We've had multiple similar cases. They usually involve a lot of money or a lot of investigation. But I'm happy to answer any questions, and I didn't notice any come up, or we can just go right straight to Andrew and take him at the end.
I think that's what we're going to do, Suzanne.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. We've sort of worked it out in terms of the way that we presented this to go from Mark talking about the DA's office, or his DA's office, which handles Penobscot County, Piscataquis County, to Suzanne, who has statewide jurisdiction. And then myself, as an assistant United States attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office, we handle federal laws throughout the country. So what that means is that if it's a case, and I'll talk a little bit about the types of cases that we're seeing primarily in the scam world, where it's a case that has a connection to Maine, but may also have, and often does have, perpetrators and victims outside the state of Maine. Those are the kind of cases that we can prosecute that might not be in the available for either Mark or Suzanne to be able to do. So the U.S. Attorney's offices, there's 93 of them throughout the country, and they're based on federal judicial districts. So for example, smaller states or states with smaller populations have a single judicial district and one U.S. Attorney's office. Our case, for example. So Maine has one U.S. Attorney's office, and we have offices. Our larger office is in Portland, a smaller office in Bangor. A state, for example, like New York, has 4 different judicial districts: the northern, the southern, the eastern, and the western. And each one of those offices has a U.S. attorney, so basically my boss, who is appointed by the president. So there are U.S. attorneys that are appointed to each one of those U.S. attorneys' offices throughout the country. So with respect to elder fraud or elder abuse, back in 2017, Congress passed the Elder Abuse Prevention and Prosecution Act of 2017. And this was in response to what Congress saw, and I think everybody is seeing, that there was a need to focus on abuse and fraud related to the elderly. And so what this act did is a few things. One is that it created in each of those U.S. attorney's offices an elder justice coordinator. So that was one assistant United States attorney who was responsible for that district's handling of elder abuse or elder fraud cases. I am that person for the District of Maine, and there's one of me in each one of the different U.S. attorney's offices throughout the country. In addition, so this elder justice coordinator, I am responsible. I handle criminal cases, and we'll talk a little bit about the types of criminal cases that we see federally. In addition, there are civil cases that are handled federally, and that often has to do with things like nursing home issues, things along those lines where there is a civil component. Also, as part of my job as the elder justice coordinator is to engage in outreach, something like I'm doing today, for example, but also I do try to speak at different events that we go to that are, so for example, like health fairs, things along those lines that we try to make outreach to and talk about. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is trying to protect people from scams. And then finally, we have quarterly reporting requirements where we have to get back to our bosses at the DOJ to talk about what kind of outreach we've done, what kind of criminal cases we've charged, what kind of civil cases have been charged, et cetera. So we get threat referrals from a variety of different agencies and people. I have down in Portland, there is a FBI agent who has been specially designated. He handles a lot of other things as well, but he also is specially designated to handle elder fraud. So a lot of the cases that come through our office come through him, but we also can get cases from HSI. There may be cases, I've not had this yet, but from Secret Service as well too. Also, we periodically get referrals from local DAs of the state AG, for example, if it's a situation, as I talked about earlier, where it's something that goes outside either the county that is the local DA's county or outside the state of Maine, so something that is multi-jurisdictional, that involves different states. That's something that we may look at as well too. Local law enforcement also provides referrals, and also we do get referrals from the Maine Legal Services for the Elderly as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the kinds of cases that that we're seeing federally. And just again, to clarify, what often is the case here, for example, I'm going to talk about romance scams. In order for us in the U.S. Attorney's Office at Maine to prosecute a case, there has to be a connection to the state of Maine. Either there is a victim in the state of Maine or there's a perpetrator in the state of Maine. But often what we see in these cases is that it's very rare that there is a one-off romance scam. So for example, you have one perpetrator and one victim. Generally, these are cells of people engaging in this type of activity. I'm working on a case right now that involved fraudsters that were from states out west, and we had victims from these same fraudsters in Chicago, in New Jersey, and in Maine. And so even though there's only one person that's involved in Maine there, because it is an overarching conspiracy, that's something that we can get involved in, even though it involves people involved outside the state of Maine. So these romance scams they're usually from dating sites, social media sites, or game apps. And it involves romantic intentions towards the victim. They engage in a variety of stories. They're often widowers or widows who reach out to their intended victim and talk about, and this can go on for months. And often what it is that they're talking about how they'd love to get together with the elderly person, there's a long-term sort of romantic commitment there. And in addition, because they're getting smarter as they go, the fraudsters will know a lot of personal details about the victims from open source websites like Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So when they're reaching out to them, they'll know what some of their common interests are, right? Like if it's somebody who's interested in car collecting or, movie watching, something along those lines, they've read those fake Facebook posts and know what's going on. Again, in the similar vein, they'll claim that they've met the victim before at a party or a wedding or other social event, because again, they're pulling this information off the internet. In terms of being able to prosecute a case federally, there has to be something called an interstate nexus, an interstate commerce nexus. And often these scams, and the reason that they're appropriate many times for our case to prosecute, is because the calls are coming from out of the state of Maine, that they're using the internet, which is a vehicle for interstate commerce, which allows us to be able to get jurisdiction to handle cases like that. And in many of these cases, there's calls that are taking place, there's emails that are taking place, there's video chats that are taking place, and all of this stuff is happening over the internet. And again, it's not surprise to anybody that sextortion of elders is on the rise. So you're often having video chats taking place between the elderly victim and the perpetrators, wherever they might be. Another common scheme that we've seen recently is the grandparent scam. And again, we've had quite a few of these in the state of Maine where it's often the person who is engaging in the scamming is doing it outside the state of Maine, right? So they're reaching in. And what they end up doing is reaching out and claiming to be a family member that's been arrested or in the hospital. They said that the family member needs immediate money to be able to get out of jail or to deal with some medical bills or anything along those lines. And they will often pose as a family member and sometimes as the grandchild in sort of a bad connection or something along those lines, so that the grandparent doesn't necessarily know. I also, at one of these health fairs that I was at, learned that apparently, and I mean, this is a scary world that we're getting into, in the world of AI, sometimes they're able to pull, like if a grandchild, for example, has an Instagram account, they're sometimes able to pull that voice off the Instagram account and be able to, through AI, speak as if they are the child that's doing it. So that's, I mean, again, you would like to say, I mean, often what I will say when we're talking to people about how not to victimize themselves, we tell them, well, go ahead and call up your grandchild, right? Well, if you've got your grandchild on the phone and it sounds like them, it makes it a lot more difficult. So every time we seem to be moving in a direction that we're able to stop that, it becomes more problematic. But again, though, with these grandparent scams, very rarely is this all happening within the state of Maine, right? Often there is internet involved, there's calling involved, there's video chatting involved that's taking place outside the state of Maine that provides that interstate commerce element that we need. Another scam that we're seeing is the Medicare scams. And again, these are often cells of people who are engaged in this, where they call up and promise the intended victims to give them a better deal on Medicare, or threaten that their Medicare may be taken away if you don't provide information to them. So they'll ask for your Medicaid number to verify your account. They also may request a processing fee. And then in addition, to threaten to cancel your coverage if you don't immediately provide information. They also will claim things like you're eligible for a refund. And we have seen instances in these Medicare scams where the scammer, again, normally out of state, is requesting the person's Medicare number and even bank details. Sweepstakes and lottery scams, I don't think I probably need to go into too much detail about these, but these are I get calls on these on a relatively frequent basis myself, but they often are targeted towards the elderly, where they're telling people that they've, won money in some type of way, and as soon as they get back to them, as soon as they're able to provide something to pay off a tax or to be able to have the money transferred to them, all the money will be coming to the victim. And of course, there's no money there. They're just paying fees for a prize that doesn't exist. This is a scam that has become recently very popular, and it's sort of more problematic because it's a multi-layered scam that takes place, and the people who are involved in this scam are often either coming from overseas or coming from multiple states when they do it. So the person initially pretends to be a technical support person and convinces the victim that there's an issue with their computer and allows remote access to their computer. Once the scammer has done that, they can observe the person's overall finances. And then it moves to the next step, where somebody from a financial institution, who's not actually from a financial institution, it's imposter, states that your computer and your financial accounts have been hacked and directs you to move your money to a US government entity for safety, quote unquote. Then there's another layer to the scam, which takes place where somebody poses as a US government employee and provides the victim with information about where the money needs to be sent in order for it to be safe from having been from your computer and financial accounts having been hacked. Of course, none of this has actually happened at any point along the line, and all that the victim ends up doing is sending their money to the scammer, who again is almost always located out of state. I won't go through these in much detail, but we also deal with different types of telemarketing scams in terms of investments, charity scams, where people are asked to contribute to imaginary charities, IRS scams that take place, and Social Security scams as well too, where people claim that their number has been hacked and they need to get out, and they need to provide money or give their Social Security number because their Social Security number has been hacked. This finally, in terms of the kinds of scams that we're seeing, is that we are frequently seeing the elderly being used as money mules. And what a money mule is somebody who, either witting or unwitting, is receiving money directly or indirectly from victims and sending directly to to perpetrators. So it's a way of laundering the money through a money mule. So we've often seen cases, and I've sat down across from people who were victims, often of romance scams, who once they've run out of money, what the victimizer will do then is turn them into a mule. So instead of the money that victims are sending going to the perpetrator, what ends up happening is that money is then sent to the mule, and the mule then ferrets out that money so that it eventually gets to the bad guy. Again, it's romance scam victims that do this. Sometimes it's unwitting, that they don't know what's going on. Sometimes even the elderly have some sense of what they're doing. But sometimes also money mules are much more culpable in terms of what's going on, and are aware that the money that's coming through their accounts is actually coming from a fraud, and that they get some percentage of that money that's coming through their account to go to the bad guys. So what type of case is a federal case? Does it need to cross state lines? It doesn't explicitly need to cross state lines. There's lots of different ways that we can get jurisdiction federally. One is through the mail. If the mail is being used, that is something that qualifies federally. If the internet is used, and that can be a situation where even within the state of Maine, and again, it's not that common, but if you have somebody within the state of Maine sending emails or other things to somebody else within the state of Maine, that would be something that could be handled federally, because the internet is considered a facility or means of interstate commerce. Anything to do with wire transactions, again, that's something that provides federal jurisdiction. Federal healthcare programs, and as I talked about before, most scams are not limited to one victim. And again, I've got cases in the office now where we have one victim that's in Maine and multiple victims outside the state of Maine. So as long as there is a connection between the various victims and the overall arching scam that's taking place, that's something that we can prosecute, even if it involves victims outside the state of Maine. And the office does consider one victim type cases, but as you can imagine, resources are spread thin. So it will depend definitely on the type of case, whether about that's something that we would be able to do. There is no federal law that's like an elder fraud law, but there are various federal statutes that do provide for enhanced sentencing. So for example, and I won't go through in detail, but aggravated identity theft, that provides for higher potential sentencing for people who have engaged in aggravated identity theft. So for example, using social security numbers, date of birth, things along those lines will result in aggravated identity theft. There also is the Scams Act. So if that involves a situation where the 10 or more people over the age of 55 have been victimized, or the scam itself involves people over the age of 55, then there can be enhanced sentencing provisions available for that. Here are some of the potential federal statutes. I will say that most commonly used in our elder fraud cases are either wire fraud or bank fraud, and either identity theft or aggravated identity theft. Those are the primary tools that we use to be able to prosecute elder fraud cases. We also use conspiracy, but that's sort of an overarching thing about, conspiracy to engage in wire fraud, that type of thing. So again, there is no federal statute that deals explicitly with elder fraud. However, there are sentencing tools that result in enhanced sentences and often apply to these elder fraud cases. So for example, the loss amount under the federal sentencing guidelines, if there's over certain dollar amounts, results in increased sentencing guidelines. So the more money that's being stolen, the more the guidelines look at. The number of victims is something explicitly looked at in the situation during sentencing. Sophisticated means. So for example, as we talked about, sort of that 3-layer internet fraud that took place, that sophisticated means is something that's considered by the guidelines. Overseas conduct, which we often see in these cases, where there may even be people acting within the United States, but there's things that are taking place outside the United States as well too. And misrepresentation of charitable, religious, political, or government organizations, use of a false ID, here is something important: is vulnerable victim. So in this case, if you have somebody like Suzanne, who was just talking about, somebody who has limited capacity, that's something that is considered under the guidelines. And also, if you're in a situation where you're a caregiver and you engage in abuse of trust or position of trust as a perpetrator, that can also result in guidelines enhancement. So that's a quick summary of the federal of the different roles of the local, state, and federal. And I think we have 5 minutes to go, which I know isn't much, but I don't know if there's any questions. I can't see the chat, so I'll leave it up to you guys.
Andy, someone says these kind of scams have been going on for 20 years. Are we making any progress in shutting these down?
Yeah, I wish, I really, really wish I had better news on that. I do. And I think a lot of, which has been very gratifying to me actually as a prosecutor, is I really want to stop those cases before they come across my desk. And so that's why I think the outreach is so important. I spend a vast majority of my time trying to protect people from becoming victims, because as you can all imagine, once you've been victimized, that money is gone for the most part, right? Like, it's very, very rare that we're going to be able to get that money back. Even if we can get a defendant in this case who's responsible for this, the ability to be able to obtain restitution or anything along those lines is limited. So, and the reality is also, unfortunately, and you can see this happening even with the AI that I talked about, every time there's some movement to get control of these scams, it seems like suddenly they come up with something even more innovative. I mean, that AI thing about using a kid's voice, I mean, that's just, like next level in terms of how difficult it is to keep on top of this stuff. So I wish there was a better answer. I don't think it's slowing down, at least not from my experience. And I think our goal is to try to stop people from being victims.
All right. Any other questions for the three prosecutors in regards to this presentation? Throw it in the chat. I do want to mention that I attended the National Elder Justice Law Enforcement Summit with AUSA McCormick in February, and there's a big push at the federal side in terms of increasing the awareness and the prosecution of these types of crimes. So we're on the right track, but it's an overwhelming amount of issues. You may arrest or prosecute one individual and then 5 more pop up. So it's a never-ending battle. We've got to do what we can to increase the awareness, which is a good time to plug the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day in June. You go to the Maine Council for Elder Abuse website. You can follow the link for the social media stuff to help you guys in each organization put that word out. But know that battle is being fought, and it's being fought very well by the prosecutors. And thank the three of you for spending the last hour with us. I know your time is precious. We greatly appreciate it and everything you do. So
Chief
with
Booth,
that, yes, go ahead.
there is somebody who has a hand raised for a question. It's Kimberly Snow.
Kimberly, go ahead. I don't see you, but go ahead.
Thanks. I was just curious about the SAR report, the suspicious activity reports, especially in relation to the first example, when those tellers did make those reports and yet the money still left the account. And I was just wondering what the intersection was between the SARs and law enforcement in the state, and how, if there's communication or if it's sort of a black hole.
Oftentimes those tellers will make referrals that are reduced to the sort of spreadsheets that I was talking about that I get in my email. I can't speak to that specific case because it was actually before I was the deputy district attorney. So I don't know if referrals were made in that specific case. But we do see APS referrals from people saying things like, so-and-so is being accompanied into the bank by an individual, and I'm concerned that that individual is exerting influence over this person. So that's all I can't speak to the specifics of the case, whether I know that Taylor went out and interviewed some of these people who expressed concerns. I'm not sure And if I said there were APS referrals, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if there were or were not. I just know that for somehow we had information that these different bank personnel had concerns.
Thank you.
I can
Thank you.
tell you, looking weekly, I see APS referrals from banks and on the SARS. So it seems to be going directly to APS.
And Kim, I'll just say too that we have quarterly meetings on SAR reports where we have together various law enforcement agencies and we go through them. I don't know about this specific case exactly, but I know that we do go through, and often they're ferreted out to different law enforcement agencies who've seen those SAR reports.
Great. Thank you so much.
Were there any other questions?
Just wanted to say, Jess Moore, thanks for posting this stuff in the chat regarding use of othering language. I appreciate that.
Okay, we are right on time for our break. We're gonna break. We're gonna start back up in 15 minutes at 2:40. So everyone take a quick break, use the bathroom, grab a snack or coffee, and we'll see you in 15. Thank you. All right, it's almost 2:40. Welcome back, everyone. Before we get started with the next presentation, which is mine, we're gonna launch a couple quick poll questions just to help us gather some data. So if you have the time and the answer these two questions, that would be appreciated. Okay, looks like we've got most of the answers in, and we are pretty good representation by nonprofits, state agencies, some legal, little lower on the law enforcement end, which is my fault, I guess, maybe. And most of you, 70-30 have attended and 30% haven't. So hopefully you guys get something out of this. And, at the end, if you have any ideas for, things to cover in the future, how to make it better, please let us know. It's our job to try to continue this and improve it every single time we do it. So you can go ahead and close the poll out if you would. All right. This next batch of presentations are going to be 4 10 to 15 minute presentations. I'm going to start off and I'll be followed by some other presenters. And so it's going to be me starting off talking community policing efforts in terms of what statewide agencies are doing in regard to, elder issues. Then we're going to be followed by Judy Shaw talking about Senior Safe, Dana Morrill talking about the area agency and aging, and then Nicole Marchese about long-term care abundance program. So I will get started. Ellen, can you launch my community engagement slides that I gave you, or should I share my screen?
It might be better if you share your screen.
All right. Can people see my screen? Community policing efforts? Okay, thank you. This is just going to be like kind of like a 2-slide presentation. These bullet comments are just to gather my thoughts so that I can talk over what we're doing for community policing practices and community engagement. I use the word engagement because it's not all community policing. A lot of it's going out there and engaging with the community. And we do a lot of different types of community policing, community engagement. A lot of this stuff is centered on, older Mainers, elders, senior citizens, of all makes and models, so to speak. So before, when we first drafted this plan to present this, I reached out to all my fellow police chiefs in the state and I said, well, what are you guys doing for community policing efforts in your areas? Because I may not be aware of what they're doing. I know what we're doing, but I get some pretty good feedback. And these bullet comments here that you're seeing are kind of a collective of what a lot of different agencies in the state are doing. So first and foremost, a lot of police officers are on various councils or committees or community groups. Here in Bath, we do a lot of engagement with our Bath Senior Center, a lot with different committees that the city has that kind of work with older Mainer issues like transportation or mobility or housing. Those are a lot of different groups. Some areas also may have like religious institution churches that do different groups, working with them. Schools are usually the youth-centered stuff, but a lot of times there might be a volunteer effort that brings in the older Mainers and we can work with that. A lot of agencies, some of the larger ones specifically, have community resource liaison teams, community policing units. They're called different things. These people are tasked specifically with going out and doing that type of engagement, and that is great if you have the ability to do that. But most Maine police departments are fairly small, so a lot of us, all of us, are doing this type of role. But these are great teams with a great focus, and they've had a lot of luck in different communities. In Bath and in Saginaw County, we have the Good Morning program, which is a program where people that are, live on their own, over the age of 60, oftentimes, that don't have friends or family nearby that can check on them. They call into our police department every morning between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. And our receptionist will answer the phone, and they just have a nice short conversation with that individual. How you doing today? You need anything? And that, build that good rapport and that connection, so they have that that safety net in case something does happen. If they don't call in, then we dispatch an officer to their house to check on them. Other areas have similar programs. Maybe they're not called the Good Morning program, but they're called something else. Bucksport PD, for example, has the Elder Watch program. I don't think anyone from Bucksport's on the training today, but it's something similar to what we're doing here. The next bullet comment, the state's contact person program is kind of a program for if you have someone that's at risk, say they have Alzheimer's or dementia, or they're a wanderer, you can voluntarily log this information with the state agency. And then if their name comes up, if they're found on the side of the road wandering around, a quick name search of this name gives us that secondary point of contact to call that person and say, hey, we've just found so-and-so out wandering, and can you make arrangements to come get them, or we'll bring them, or wherever. That's had a lot of good luck. In our area, it was called the Wanderers Program. We've done it locally. That has kind of morphed into, in our area and other areas, the Project Lifesaver Program. A lot of you have heard of that. That's a specific program for the Alzheimer's, dementia, autism wanderers, where they get a bracelet that they can wear around their wrist, so that when they do wander off, if they wander off, we can kind of use like radio communication, like triangulation, to kind of figure out where they've gone. We have that program that's shared with the county, so it's pretty much anywhere in Saginaw County, participant of the Project Lifesaver, if they go missing, we can pull these devices out and quickly locate them. So that's been a great program, and that is funded oftentimes through grants and donations. We also have safety programs. We do sand buckets for seniors in the winter, where we deliver a bucket of sand that the people can spread on their walkway so they don't slip and fall in the winter time. Rescue units, EMTs, they have winter emergency kits they may hand out within the community when they're on call. If they see someone that might need a little extra emergency kit, they hand that out. We also offer like drug take back days. They just had one on the 27th, but in our agency and in many other agencies, we have that green box in our lobby 24/7. And that is, we're cleaning that thing out every week. That's heavily used for people to get rid of their medications. A lot of what we do is we kind of pair up with AARP oftentimes, or other local groups, and talk about the scams and the fraud prevention. Last hour we had all that talks about these scams that are going on, and of all the ones that Andrew McCormick listed, I've seen all of them. I haven't seen the Medicare one yet, but we've seen every single other one of them, with the lottery and the cyber stuff and the grandparent scam. And the more engagement we can do in the community, and we go to like Bath Housing and we give presentations. We go to the senior center and we give presentations. There's been presentations at the local library to get that awareness out for these scams, to make people aware that you really can't trust what you're seeing and what you're hearing. It's a little frustrating at times, because we give these education out and we think people are understand it, and then come back to work the next day and there's 3 more scams that have come in reported. So it's kind of that never ending battle, like I mentioned in the last block. I have Triad in here, so there's still some Triad organizations in the state. COVID kind of affected some of them, but Triad is that partnership between law enforcement, senior citizen or elder or older Mainer services, and those older Mainers themselves. That is a kind of focused on the policing end and the criminal end of it. But we have a very good network in our area, and we exchange information monthly. It's a short meeting to kind of collaborate on common issues that we're seeing. So triads are great. Sometimes you have the, they're more elder abuse task forces, but they're all kind of, they could be called different things, but they all deal with the same type of issues. That collaboration is great. Just the networking, getting out there, like you meet so many people and you can connect the dots and refer people to other resources. And it's been very, very helpful. And it's something that I would strongly suggest that police agencies in Maine look at either revamping, doing, or reestablishing. The community outreach meet and greet events, this is the stuff that you typically think of when you think of like community policing. Like it's the national night out, coffee with a cop, shop with a cop, walk with a cop, talk with a cop. That gets us out in the community to hang out and just have fun with the public. And it's been very beneficial. We have a great community relationship in Bath, in this area. And I think in Maine in general, it seems like we have a very supportive community, and we're also supportive of our community that we're serving and living in. So that has been a great to have, and we enjoy doing them a lot. Faith in Blue Weekend is relatively new, but I talked earlier about the church and religious outreach. The Faith in Blue is more of an organized approach to that, and it's conducted usually in October, where we pair up with local churches and we go out and we have these community policing, community engagement type events. Citizen Police Academy, we haven't done one in a while, but those that attended our Citizen Police Academy, a lot of them were older Mainers that were retirees or just interested in what we do. And that kind of brought them to volunteering with us as like not volunteer police, but volunteers to the police department. And they help us with a lot of these community policing events that we hold. They help us during Heritage Days. They help us with parades. They're helping us with our Bath Safety Day and bike rodeo that we're doing in a couple weeks. So attending that Citizen Police Academy for anyone in the public, but those retirees with more time on their hands, we certainly leverage that a willingness to volunteer and help us out. And then lastly, it's our communications. More and more people are using social media now. It used to be we'd have to, paper newsletters or going and physically talking to groups to get the word out. But as the generations grow older and people are more and more used to social media and getting their information from the internet, that's been a great resource for us to get the word out as to what's going on. But we still do the public meetings. We still hold those town halls to get feedback from our public. Smaller towns have a great results with that. In larger cities, they hold them. We're kind of right in the middle where we will hold them, and we've a city of 8,000 people. You're lucky if you get 20 people arrive and attend it, but those 20 people are usually very engaging, and it's been worthwhile. So those are some of the things that agencies in the state are doing. And now, if anyone in the Zoom world here has any ideas about things that are going on or ideas that we need to address, please put that in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can catch up on the chat to see if there was anything in there that came out.
One of the
Kennebec
questions
County,
was,
I don't know about Kennebec County. Chris, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of the questions was about, I would imagine everybody has questions about, this is specific to Bath, but do you know of other towns or cities that have similar types of programs, and how would they access that?
Yeah, so everyone that replied to my request for information, they had many of those general bullet comments about the different types of events. Most of them are doing those things. They may be named something different, but most of them are doing that. If anyone in the audience here is interested, call the local police department, call the sheriff's office, or if you're covered by the state police, call the local barracks and see what's going on. We love the outreach and engagement. So yeah, that's where I would start. If you have a specific area in mind and you need to get connected with them, you can also reach out to me and I can make those inroads. I've done that in the past before. What else do we have? National Night Out, yes, that's been a great event. Yeah, National Night Out's for the public. Anyone can go to it. I think that one's coming up in August of this year, at least in our area. File of Life, yes. Actually, I was just talking about that the other day with someone. That is still ongoing in places. Yeah, so I think I've caught up on the chats. Were there any other questions for me in regards to community engagement before we move on to the next presentation?
There was somebody who asked, is there a chance of getting a list of these social events with dates and information if we want to make this happen in our own communities?
There's no like list that I know of. I mean, you would have to go to probably like the social media pages of the departments to see what they're like putting out in advance. A lot of these things are kind of spur of the moment, like, oh, we're gonna go have a meeting about this issue because it just came up. So I would reach out to your local agencies to make those inroads. And if you need help, I can help with that. Any other questions? Okay, I appreciate your time, and I'm next going to be turning it over to Judy Shaw, the famous Judy Shaw. Are you ready, Judy?
I am ready. Thank you.
All right, go ahead.
Um, you're all going to have to look at each other because I did not do a PowerPoint presentation. But I am here today to talk about Senior Safe, which is a program of the Maine Council for Elder Abuse Prevention. I appreciate the information that Jess put in the chat earlier about reframing the language that we use. And we do know that we have to do a little bit of updating to the Senior Safe program on a couple of levels for current law and what have you. And looking at the name of the program itself certainly is something that we should take a look at. Senior Safe was born out of a question, really. Early on, when the council was first formed, we all sort of had the question in our minds, why are we not seeing more reporting to Adult Protective Services from financial institutions? So a question or a problem was identified. And when you have a question or a problem that's identified, what's the first thing you do? You gather information. What are the hurdles? What are the challenges? What might be preventing financial institutions from reporting? And so we held, when I say we, I mean the council, held a series of meetings with key stakeholders. And those stakeholders included individuals from financial institutions. And I'm not talking about the executives in these institutions. We interviewed tellers, customer service representatives, branch managers, the people who really are interacting with the consumers the people in our communities. We interviewed law enforcement. We interviewed government agencies, Adult Protective Services. We interviewed people from community organizations to find out what their experiences were, to gather as much information as we could to educate ourselves about what were the challenges, what were the hurdles that might exist. One of the things that came to the forefront was the fact that training financial institution employees around these issues seemed to be one aspect that would be important. And that was solidified by my own personal experience when a very savvy credit union branch manager observed some behavioral and account red flags with my mother. My mother went to 2 places every week, church and to her credit union branch. And the branch manager noticed changes to my mother's demeanor, noticed that she wasn't talking about her grandchildren anymore, and decided to take a peek at my mother's accounts and learned that there was a strange electronic transaction that was happening in her accounts. and she knew that my mother hated electronic banking. So she got in touch with my sister, who was also on the account, and they discovered that my mom had fallen victim to a work from home scam that Andrew sort of alluded to earlier. They were able to catch it early on, but for me, even more importantly, it prompted my sister to take my mother to the doctor, and we learned she had early stage dementia. So we often think of Effie, the branch manager, as our guardian angel, because I believe we had more time with my mom than we would have had if Effie hadn't identified that for us. So based on that experience, we moved forward and figured out what are the concerns, what were the hurdles. We learned that there were a couple of different challenges that were causing financial institutions to perhaps be a little bit reluctant. One was they didn't know what to do if the customer that they were working with was not incapacitated. If they had mild cognitive impairment or just something as the result of our natural aging process, where did they go? Adult Protective Services deals with dependency and incapacity. So that was one hurdle that we needed to address. The other was they were clearly, consistently identifying concerns about reporting to anyone other than their functional banking regulator based upon federal privacy laws. So how did we address those concerns? Well, first of all, we were able to develop a second point of entry into state government. If there was a good faith reason to believe that the customer was incapacitated or dependent, the report would go to Adult Protective Services. But if there was a reason to believe that level of incapacity didn't exist, then the Office of Securities, thanks to Commissioner Ann Head from my Department of Professional Financial Regulation, Office of Securities was identified as the second point of entry that we would accept those reports and assist the financial institutions with addressing the issues. And I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about what happens when you call the Office of Securities. We also made sure to identify community-based resources where referrals could be made. So reporting that is done to a state or federal agency can be done without the consent of the customer. But community referrals can be made and can be very powerful in conjunction with the customer, with permission of the customer. It's kind of this idea of a warm handoff. There was also a commitment by all of the partners who were participating in the development of this program, which included the Bureau of Financial Institutions, Adult Protective Services, the Office of Securities, Legal Services for Maine Elders, area agencies on aging, the financial institutions themselves are key partners. The Maine Credit Union League and the Maine Bankers Association were at the center of this partnership, as well as area agencies on aging, domestic violence and sexual assault advocates. We all made a commitment to what we call a no wrong door approach. If something goes to our office and it belongs in the hands of law enforcement, we will get it in the hands of law enforcement. If something goes to legal services for the elderly and legal services for Maine elders, and they identify it as something that the Office of Securities might be able to handle, then there was a commitment that that would find its way to the Office of Securities. So it's an idea of having a safety net that is built among these partners who are collaborating. So that collaboration was formed. The Senior Safe Training Program was put together, which I'll talk about in more detail, and it launched in February of 2014. So in preparing for this, I realized we have our 10-year anniversary this year, and I hadn't recognized that. That still left the concern about would they be violating federal privacy laws if they were reporting to law enforcement, they were reporting to the Office of Securities or some other agency. And that was resolved with the passage of the Federal Senior Safe Act in 2018. I was very privileged to work with Senator Collins, as well as then Congressman Poliquin, to develop that act and have its passage take place. That I won't go into details about the act, but it provided a level of immunity for good faith reporting that addressed the concern of the financial institutions. So what exactly is the Senior Safe Program? It's a comprehensive training program for financial institution employees that teaches the employees who are on the front line to identify common red flags for financial exploitation or other forms of elder abuse. It provides some action steps that those frontline individuals can take And it also suggests an internal reporting or referral protocol that managers and supervisors within the institution can also take. It's available to banks and credit unions. We have also used it a couple of times with the securities industry, with broker-dealers and investment advisors as well. For the frontline professionals, the red flags are sourced from some of the red flags identified by FinCEN for suspicious activity reporting, red flags that have been identified and developed over the years by Adult Protective Services and other resources. They fall into two basic categories: behavioral red flags and account activity. So if we think back to the very brief story I told about my mom, there were clear behavioral changes that the branch manager had identified in terms of her looking a little depressed, not talking about her grandchildren, just looking a little bit disheveled, but also changes in her account activity, very unusual for my mother to engage in electronic banking. So that was a red flag for the branch manager. During the training, we identify possible action steps. Are there safer alternatives? When we think about people who want to wire transfer money, can you maybe suggest to them that they use a check so that can slow the pace of the process down if they're absolutely insistent on sending it? Certainly, we hear that scam artists want everybody to go use Bitcoin ATMs. Can you talk them out of that and have them use more traditional means so that there's a greater opportunity to slow the transaction or trace the transaction? And developing internal reporting protocols. The punchline for those who are literally at the front, the forward-facing people in a financial institution, really is make sure you're notifying your branch manager or supervisor so that you can decide how to proceed. If someone's coming in with a new caregiver that seems to be particularly assertive, maybe the answer is to try to move the customer away from that individual and have a more private conversation, for example. We leave during the training, we leave what we call a quick response or teller card. And I've seen them at teller stations before that give the red flags on one side. And then on the other side, it talks a little bit about what the response might be. The second half of the training is for managers, supervisors, bank secrecy officers, compliance professionals, those individuals. The focus of that component is suggestions on developing an internal protocol on what to do when those on the who are forward-facing are reporting these red flags, providing some action steps for responding, some suggestions, and we leave behind what we call a reporting and referral card. That reporting and referral card identifies state agencies to which a financial institution can report, even without the customer's consent. So again, Adult Protective Services, certainly law enforcement, and the Office of Securities, if it's someone who doesn't fall within the jurisdiction of Adult Protective Services. And then also we identify the community-based resources that are available. Legal Services for Maine Elders, recommend that for law enforcement, if a branch is located in Bath, talk to Chief Booth and see if you can get a specific point of contact so you have someone you can always call if there's a situation that requires attention. Also, domestic violence and sexual assault resources, and certainly the area agencies on aging. We provide all of that information during the course of the presentation. For this half, we have an individual from the Bureau of Financial Institutions come and give information about state and federal banking laws to reassure around those privacy concerns. We have a representative from Adult Protective Services come and do what I call demystifying APS so that the financial institutions feel comfortable making reports. We have a representative from Legal Services for Maine Elders come and talk about what resources they can provide and how to make that warm handoff, how to help a customer be referred to that organization as well. And of course, someone from the Office of Securities is there to talk about what our role is and how we can assist. I've talked about the no wrong door approach. It really is important for people to understand that if you contact, for example, the Office of Securities and Adult Protective Services really is one who can assist. We're going to help you get connected with them. I just want to wrap up with explaining the role of the Office of Securities, because that's a little bit unique for a department to say, hey, we're going to raise our hand. We'll be the other point of contact, port of entry into state government. So the Office of Securities, of our 5 investigator positions, we have 1 investigator who is dedicated to handling all senior safe calls. So if someone were to call our office and they said, I'm calling from a financial institution and I need to talk to somebody, you're going to get James Trask currently, and James is wonderful and you're going to have a wonderful experience. So what does James do when he talks to someone from a financial institution? He's going to try to gather information. What exactly is going on? What have you observed? What are the red flags that you're seeing? And he's going to brainstorm a little bit about a possible approach. He's probably going to take in most cases, take in a bit of information and let you know that he's going to get back to you, because he may want to brainstorm internally with his director, Parker Furland, and maybe other investigators to come up with the best game plan. We find that there are a few approaches that we often take in these cases. It's not unusual for us to say, you know what, it sounds like that a wellness check is in order here. And we will go ahead and contact the local law enforcement, either the police chief, the sheriff, whoever it may be. We'll contact local law enforcement and ask them to please do a well person check and please report back to us what the result is. We may say to the bank or credit union personnel, we think you need to contact law enforcement right away. And hopefully they have a local contact and they will reach out to law enforcement right away. They don't have to, they can say, no, we don't want to do that, but we're trying to make recommendations that might make sense. We may decide that given this particular situation, this is something that it would be helpful for APS to take a look at. In that case, we would ask the bank or credit union to go ahead and make that report, but that we will also reach out to our specific point of contact at APS so that they know to anticipate a report coming from a particular financial institution. It is not unusual for us to also help make connections with those community resources that we talked about. Over my time in the Office of Securities, there have been plenty of times where we've helped people get connected with an area agency on aging, many times where we have helped individuals get connected with legal services for MENA elders and other resources. The other really important resource that can be so very valuable is our investigator is willing to talk to the customer. Sometimes just having someone who says, I'm an investigator with the State of Maine Office of Securities, talk to someone about what they see as red flags can help the individual see, okay, maybe there is some sort of scam going on or a potential scam going on. And to that point, I'm just going to end by sharing with you one recent success story that we had. James had a call from a financial institution who indicated that they had a customer who withdrew $25,000 in cash. And when the branch employee was a little suspicious because this was out of character for his transactions, they started to ask questions to try to see if they could get more information. And the customer just wasn't going to share any information. It turns out that there was a scam artist who was impersonating a local attorney who had contacted this customer and said that the customer needed to pay a bail bond and that the customer had to actually meet the bailiff in person and hand over this cash to this bailiff. The customer did, in fact, meet with the bailiff and hand over the money. And then the individual who was impersonating the attorney reached back out to the customer and said, no, actually, we need more money. A savvy manager of the financial institution found a way to delay the transaction and immediately called the Office of Securities to talk to James. During that conversation, the manager agreed to connect James with the customer to have a conversation about what was going on. And after James was able to explain all of the various red flags, the light bulb went off and the customer came to understand that it was a scam, and actually said that the financial institution employees did a great job and they were asking really good questions that also helped him see that it was a scam. James, of course, assisted the customer in filing reports with local law enforcement through the Internet Crime Complaint Center. And we often have consumers connect with the Bureau of Consumer Credit Protection as well, because they can help lock down their identity to try to avoid any potential identity theft. The bottom line is we're here to help brainstorm ideas. We're here to provide an investigator to meet with a customer or client to be able to help them understand that they have the potential to be the victim of scam. In this case, the outcome was this collaboration resulted in preventing an additional loss of over $22,000. It raised awareness for the customer, which will reduce the likelihood of future exploitation. And it also helped get key information into the hands of federal and local law enforcement to help identify the scammers. This program has trained over 800 bank and credit union personnel. Any financial institution that wants the training should either contact the Office of Securities directly or go through the Maine Bankers Association or Maine Credit Union League. The training takes about 4 hours total, but trust me, it is worth it. All you have to do is provide the day and time and location, and we'll be there. We can break it into 2 separate 2-hour sessions. Just for the Office of Securities in the past 5 years, we've received more than 75 referrals from financial institutions. And I'm going to end by just saying this. It's not just about the money, it's about lives. I can't begin to tell you how many times I have called a local police chief for a wellness check, only to learn that when the law enforcement officer arrived, they found the individual was in serious danger, in some cases within hours of death. So it is a really important program. It's a successful program, and it's something that I hope all of our financial institutions would embrace. I am going to put my contact information in the chat. So if anyone has more questions about the program or wants to schedule a training, please reach out to me.
Judy, there was just one question, and I think Ellen wanted to answer it. It was just about, should we consider making bank employees mandated reporters? And so, Ellen, I don't know if you want to answer it, and maybe Judy, you can weigh in too.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I will tell you that the securities industry, broker dealers and investment advisors in Maine are mandated reporters under the Uniform Securities Act. They are not mandated reporters under APS law, but they are mandated under our securities law, particularly under our act to protect vulnerable adults. I think it's not an easy question to answer. I think, it's important when we try to decide whether a financial institution should in fact be a mandated reporter to hear from all the stakeholders, because the institutions themselves may have very legitimate reasons. I do think we need to commend the financial institutions for voluntarily making these reports, both to the Office of Securities, we're not their regulator, and to APS, and for working so closely with us over the years, over the past 10 years, to make sure that this training is happening, working with us in Washington, D.C. to get this Federal Senior Safe Act passed as well. So I think it's not a black and white question, and I wouldn't want to answer the question without having had plenty of opportunity to speak to the financial institutions to get their side of whether they should or should not.
And I'll just weigh in. I'm Ellen Parrington with the Maine Credit Union League. I'm their Director of Compliance. I'm also your friendly tech support for today. We have traditionally held that financial institutions in Maine should not be mandatory reporters. The way Maine statutes are set up, it's not that the institution would be a mandated reporter, it would be an individual working at that institution. And our tellers are often, they're not always, but they can be young, they could be inexperienced. And that's a pretty heavy burden to put on someone who may only see someone once every couple of weeks, once every month. So we are of the opinion that it's going to be more effective for us to be, when we have that reasonable suspicion, to be able to make that call maybe not put that on the tellers, but still educate them and provide them the information they need to go to the higher ups in the office to make that assessment.
And just following up on that, I would note that the securities industry, while the individuals need to report, we do allow a reporting up to supervisors so that the supervisors or the compliance professionals may be the ones who are making the report. They may have a dedicated individual who makes those reports to us. In response to Kim Snow's comment about suspicious activity reports, I would say during the training, one of the things we emphasize during the Senior Safe training is filing a suspicious activity report should not be a substitute for local reporting. The local reporting to APS or reporting to the Office of Securities or law enforcement should happen in addition to a suspicious activity report, but neither is a replacement for the other. And I see a question about the privacy of the customer and is it a violation of their rights? That is why there are only particular reporting that can occur without the customer's consent. And that reporting is to law enforcement or a state or federal agency. Those are exceptions under state and federal privacy laws. So it's not a violation of their rights if there is a good faith reason to believe that there's some sort of exploitation or abuse that's occurring. And I see Ellen also replied that there are specific guidelines that permit this. The Federal Senior Safe Act certainly permits it. And there are provisions in the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act as well, which permit reporting to state and federal agencies and law enforcement. And I've taken up more than my time, so I'm going to pass it on to Dana Morrow, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Judy. Like Judy, I have a presentation that I will attach to the chat. But I work for Seniors Plus. We are one of 5 area agencies on aging in the state of Maine. And I think we all work together to help our older adults and our disabled adults to get as much independence as they can, with dignity, and make sure that their quality of life is what they want it to be. And all of the area agencies on aging want to make sure that the folks that we work with are making informed decisions and informed choices. And I think Chief Booth mentioned earlier, or someone, we don't always agree with decisions that older adults or folks in the community are making, but we have to support them and at least give them information. So as I said, Seniors Plus is one of 5 area agencies. We are all nonprofit. We have a Southern Maine Area Agency on Aging in our southern part of the state. Coming up, Central Maine is Seniors Plus. We do Androscoggin, Franklin, and Oxford counties. Above us is Spectrum Generations. Then we move up to Eastern Area Agency on Aging, and then finally Aroostook Area Agency on Aging. So all of the area agencies typically do the same types of programs with some differences, but for the most part, we all do the same types of programs. Again, we want to make sure folks have information about whatever question they have so that they get the resources they need to make informed choices. So in our community service division here, folks can call in to the agency and talk with a community service specialist who will answer questions depending on whatever the need is. A lot of what we do, especially now, is we're working with the homeless population to help them with applications to get their name on waiting lists, and getting them resources for where food programs are and that sort of thing. So we take calls on all sorts of different things. We connect them to the different agencies that they need to be connected to. So again, some examples of the assistance that community service departments do. Again, we locate home care services, availability of staff and meeting time. We can help folks sometimes fill out those applications, especially if there is a need for somebody who might be illiterate or hearing impaired or vision impaired. We help folks make informed choices about advanced directives. So we can review those documents with them and make sure that they're making decisions that they truly want. We direct people who are hearing and sight impaired to resources specific for them with getting adaptive equipment or other things in the home that they need. We help folks gain access to nursing facilities through the Maximus assessment process. We explain that process to them so that they know how it all works and exactly what's going to happen when the assessment happens. And then they get connected with a care coordination agency. So that's all explained on what that's going to entail for them. We do help folks with adaptive equipment, whether it's gaining access through a local loan closet or whether it's their Medicare that may pay for something that they need. Maybe they need a referral to an area agent, a skilled agency that would provide a therapist to go in and do some sort of an evaluation. We do benefit checks for folks, especially those that are struggling financially. And I think that's a huge thing right now with the cost of groceries and with the cost of electricity and things like that. Benefit checks, where somebody is financially, what they can qualify for, and then help them to apply for those benefits. And then, of course, long-term support services, whether it's in-home care needs or, again, facility placement. We all do, all the area agencies, Medicare counseling. Our community service staff works with some of the best volunteers for Medicare purposes. And most of the community service staff here at Seniors Plus is Medicare certified, including myself. So we meet with individuals, we talk with them without bias about what their specific goals are, what their needs are. We can help them determine which is better for them, whether it's a supplement plan or an advantage plan. We help them with their drug plans. And if there is some sort of issue with medications, we can ask for help through legal services and the Part D unit there to help us unscramble some of those more complicated cases. Also with Medicare, we help folks learn about fraud and different parts of their benefit statements and what that means. It still amazes me how many folks out there will give out their Social Security number or their Medicare number over the phone. So we can help folks that get into that situation and figure out how to help it and change their situation. So just being aware of scams and tricks and that sort of thing. Area agencies on aging also have a variety of caregiving resources. Here in our Lewiston office, or at Seniors Plus, I should say, we have support groups for caregivers dealing with their loved ones who have dementia or Alzheimer's. We have 2 support groups here in our Lewiston office, and we have support groups in each of our satellite offices, one in Wilton and one in Norway. We have here at Seniors Plus a specific person dedicated to caregiver resources, so she can talk with a family member about what their needs are, direct them to what caregiving respite program might be appropriate for them. Because I think fraud and abuse happens a lot when people are tired and when they're just at wit's end. They're more apt to try to gain help through things that may not be appropriate. So caregiving can be very stressful, as we all know. So we try to help with as many programs as we can. We have education programs for folks in regards to dementia type resources. All of the area agencies on aging also have a variety of evidence-based programs that can help individuals with their diabetes or chronic pain, you know, teaching those folks how to deal with what they have and best practice for them. And again, they're all evidence-based. We do a lot of exercise programs. I know here at Seniors Plus, we have a woman who comes in and does an exercise program. The room is absolutely full. And it's so nice to hear our older adults just laughing and giggling, and they're exercising and staying healthy, and their minds are healthy. And it's great. We also do a variety of healthy living for me programs. Again, living well with better health, with diabetes, chronic pain, and building better caregivers for those, caregivers working with folks with dementia. A program that's near and dear to my heart that I used to oversee is our Money Minders programs. So we work with our local credit unions and banks, and we are looking to collaborate more with the banks and credit unions. What Money Minders is a program where we have volunteers that are background checked and trained to work with individuals in the community. We help them develop a budget. We help them read their mail, understand their Medicare statements. We help them to pay their bills. If they're vision impaired, or maybe they are too shaky and they need help writing out their checks, we can help to do that. We never ever sign, of course, but we want to make sure that individuals are safe from the possibility of eviction. The other part of the Money Minders program is that with the individuals and the volunteers that we help, sometimes we're able to catch some of those things, like Judy said, you know, on statements. Are there things that just don't seem right? Withdrawals that are out of the norm. We can pick up on some of those things and work with the client and the bank to figure out exactly what's going on. A lot of times, unfortunately, we do get referrals from Adult Protective Service and other places where the older adult has been taken advantage of and is now starting from the ground up again, you know, how to rebuild their financial independence. So the Money Minders program is great. We've helped a lot of folks avoid some exploitation. So great program. Another program where we help kind of keep an eye on the adult in the community is through our Friendly Caller program, where, again, volunteers will reach out to folks in the community, touch base, especially if they're homebound or don't have family that check in. They want to just, our volunteers check in and make sure that they're okay, sort of like the Good Morning program that Chief Booth was talking about earlier. And if a friendly caller finds that there's an issue or a concern that that person shares, and they get permission to kind of get it back to community resources to, you know, give resources and help, then that works too. And another program where we kind of help keep eyes on our older adults is through our nutrition program. All of the area agencies on aging have a Meals on Wheels program. And the best part of that is the delivery drivers that go out and deliver these meals to our older adults and those with disabilities that need that nutrition to help keep them safe. They form relationships with their clients, and it's a second set of eyes. And sometimes we have drivers that deliver twice a week. Sometimes it's once a week in our far-reaching areas. Sometimes it's once a month, but it's a set of eyes. And once they get to know their clients, they can kind of pick out, you know, wow, that's really different, or something's going on here. Or maybe the client will even share a need or a concern that they can bring back to community service so that we can reach out again with resources and make sure that that individual stays safe. And those Meals on Wheels programs are not for everybody, but it is a great source of nutrition. It meets the dietary guidelines for our older adults. They're low salt, they're low fat. So it's a great opportunity for individuals to have that nutrition. And again, make sure that somebody's seeing them at least a few times. So in order to refer for all area agencies, there is contact lines where you can call in and tell probably the receptionist who you're looking to talk to, whether it's a Medicare person or a community service person, or even for Meals on Wheels. You call in, you let them know what you're looking for. They transfer the call, and then we take referral information and go from there. So our services, again, are free for the most part. I mean, the only services that I'm aware of within the area agencies that are charged some of our exercise programs like Tai Chi and that the adult exercise program I was talking about earlier, and that's only because we have an outside vendor that comes in. But our education programs are free. So people come in, they learn about different things. They craft, they do all sorts of different things, and it helps with social isolation, to get people in here and working with each other. So it works all the way around. Again, I will put my presentation in the chat. That will give you a lot of phone numbers that you can contact all around the state of Maine with the different area agencies that you may work with. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today. Chris, I didn't know if there was any questions in the chat.
Let's see. With your MOW program is good, but what is the communication line when one wants to resume services that have been on hold?
Okay, so that's Meals on Wheels. If somebody has Meals on Wheels and they have to go to the hospital for whatever reason, or they go to rehab, we have the ability to put somebody's Meals on Wheels on hold. Basically, all it takes is a phone call back to Seniors Plus, either to somebody in community services or to the nutrition department directly, and then we'll go ahead and resume those meals if we're able to.
The next question is, how are you getting the seniors to check on? I am the chairperson for a triad, and this is one of the things that we wanted to get started, but finding the people that need to be checked on has been difficult.
I'm wondering if that's in regards to our Friendly Caller program. And if that's the case, typically we get referrals from family members, from the client themselves. Sometimes it's law enforcement, sometimes it's adult protective. So those referrals come in and then we connect them with a volunteer.
I don't see any other questions.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, Nicole, you're up.
All right, great. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see this? Okay, perfect. All right. I'm Nicole Marchese, and I'm the project manager for the Maine Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program. I'm happy to be here today to share about all our programs that we have to offer. Sorry, I have to move my box of where I see myself and where all my information is on, so just give me a second. So the Maine Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program is a nonprofit agency whose mission is to advocate for the quality of life and care for long-term care consumers. Our services are free and confidential. I always like to make sure people know that we are free and we are confidential. Federal law and Maine law authorizes our staff to investigate complaints made by or on behalf of long-term care consumers and to assist consumers in exercising their rights that are guaranteed by law. So our program serves residents of nursing homes, assisted housing programs, including residential care and assisted living, consumers receiving home care services, including homemaker, adult day, and hospice. We also serve patients in hospitals facing barriers to accessing long-term care services, which I'll dive into a little bit about each program shortly. So who can ask for our assistance. So a person interested in improving the quality of care for consumers, a consumer receiving services from a home care agency, a resident in a long-term care facility, an employee or administrator of an agency or facility, family or friends of consumers or residents, and representatives of public agencies or community groups. And of course, anyone can give us a call, and if it's not something that we can help with, we always do a warm handoff and try to find a resource available for that individual. Callers may remain anonymous, and this is where you would access our, to be able to access our services or be able to speak with our intake individual to see if we can get permission and consent from the resident to open a case. We also do have a website that I neglected to put on this slide, which is maineombudsman.org, which you can check out more information about each service and what we offer beyond what I share today, as I want to be able to get everything in the limited time period. So the purpose of LitCop is to establish and maintain a presence in long-term care facilities, investigate and resolve complaints and concerns in long-term care facilities and home care consumers, provide education regarding resident rights, monitor development of federal, state, and local laws, regulations, and policies related to long-term care. So I'm going to cover a little bit about our programs today. It's broken down into 4 major programs that we help with, and I'm just going to give a shout out because I have lots of amazing coworkers on this call today that either manage these programs or work very diligently in providing excellent advocacy across the state. So I just wanted to give a shout out to those people on the call. So I'm going to cover home care, Homeward Bound, hospital patient advocacy, and the volunteer program. So home care, the Maine Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program is dedicated to advocating for the rights of in-home care consumers. Our program serves as a crucial resource to help and improve and or secure your main in-home care services. Sorry, that sentence got me. We address care complaints and support appeals for reduced or denied home care services. We assist with access to durable medical equipment, help with American and Disability Act, ADA, reasonable accommodation requests, and assist young adults with medical needs transition from children to adult programming. Our primary role is to advocate for rights to Maine in-home care, offering educational insights into paid family caregiving and advocating for consumers while connecting you with community resources to enrich your care access and policy understanding. So we'll move here to Homeward Bound. And this is a program to help nursing home residents transition to the community. So this is also Maine's Money Follows the Person program, which some of you may hear that terminology as well related to Homeward Bound. So this is a demonstration project funded by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, created to assist residents of nursing homes to return to the community. The project also helps to identify how to best help people transition back to the community and to improve Maine's long-term care system. So the Ombudsman Program is the referral and advocacy manager for Homeward Bound. And so the Ombudsman Program meets with anyone interested in Homeward Bound to explain the program and help them apply. And if they are accepted, act as their advocate throughout the transition planning process. So the criteria to be able to use Homeward Bound is the individual must be 18 or older, have resided in a nursing home or hospital for 60 days by time of discharge, received Maine care for at least 1 day in this setting, qualify for nursing home level of care in the community, and plan to move to a qualified residence. So we have the hospital patient advocacy program as well. And so we provide advocacy to patients in hospitals when barriers to accessing long-term care services and supports exist. So the Ombudsman Program will work with the patient, family legal representative, and the hospital to provide advocacy to effectively address the barriers to accessing these services. The hospital care manager will must have consent from the patient or their legal representative prior to making a referral. And the patient, family, or legal representative may contact the Ombudsman Program for assistance or with questions. The Ombudsman Program will only take action with informed consent from the patient or legal rep. A referral to the Ombudsman program does not diminish the role of the care manager in planning a safe and appropriate discharge. So the Ombudsman program's advocacy within this program, our mandate is to serve as the patient advocate, advocate with informed consent from patient or their legal rep, get accurate information from the hospital regarding patient needs and, if appropriate, from placement prior to hospitalization. Communicate with team members to effectively address barriers to placement and avoid duplication. Work closely with the patient to identify an environment in which the patient will thrive, and follow up with the patient as needed after discharge, including visits to the long-term care home as well. They're the volunteer program, which the volunteers are the heart of the program. This is a close to home program, close to the heart program for me, as I was a volunteer program manager prior to this role. I love the volunteers of the Ombudsman program. So the volunteer Ombudsman representatives are advocates to provide a voice for the concerns of long-term care residents who are living in a nursing home, residential care, or assisted living. And some of these volunteer activities include visiting residents in long-term care settings, such as nursing homes, residential care, and assisted living, and educate residents and staff about their rights, engage in conversations with residents to learn about problems or concerns, seek resident permission to address problems or concerns regarding quality of life, and additionally, an opportunity to become an in-service trainer to provide education on resident rights and mandatory reporting to staff in nursing homes, residential care, and assisted living, which we also have staff that provide this education to facility staff as well. And there is a lot of criteria as far as the screening process to become a volunteer, which you would find on our website. To be able, as we know, we're working with a very vulnerable population. So there is a screening process in which a volunteer has to go through in order to be a volunteer Ombudsman representative. And that's all I have for you. Any questions?
Thank you, Nicole. I don't see any questions in the chat. So we can move on with our closing remarks. I guess we're towards the end of the agenda here for today. So first of all, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending. This was a nice event to get together. Yes, it's online, but in some ways that's kind of easier for us to take time out of our day all over the state to get together and network. I do want to remind people that there is an in-person event. It's the Elder Abuse Prevention Roundtable that we put on every year. That's at the Augusta Civic Center. That's going to be November 8th from around 9 to 2. You'll see more information eventually hit our website, the Maine Council for Elder Abuse Prevention. You can also go to that website for that World Elder Abuse Awareness Day information, which is going to be June 15th, I believe. So please get on there, check us out. My contact information's on there. I do want to thank Ellen again for helping out with the technology side of it. I want to thank my co-chair, Jill Randall, for doing a lot of work behind the scenes, setting this up and managing this. And of course, to our presenters today who presented. With that in mind, here's last chance for anyone with any really big questions to shoot it in chat or save it and email us and we can get back to you later. Thank you. Thank you. All right, everyone, thank you for coming, and we will hopefully see some of you in November. If not, maybe again next year. Thank you.